Welcome to Empowered, Mind-Body Inspiration. The mind is the map to wholeness, wellness, health. The heart is the key to genius and inspiration. Join me and my guests as we explore how to release and rewire into who you truly are, unique, whole, and empowered. Please like, share, and subscribe. Spiral up, spiral out. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Christian de la Huerta. With 30 years of experience, Christian is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and leading voice in the breathwork community. He has traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. He is an award-winning, critically acclaimed author and has spoken on the TEDx stage. His new book, and the conversation for today, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multi-Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as a balm for the soul of anyone searching for truth and answers to life's difficult questions. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted and honored to be on your podcast.
Yes, so excited. Christian, I wanted to start with a quote that's very inspirational, and it kind of leads into the whole conversation. And you say in your book that the whole world needs us as soulful leaders fully in our power. It needs all of us who have even an inkling or suspicion that we have work to do to advance our collective evolution on the planet. This is it. We are the help. All hands on deck. The time is now, calling all heroes. I love that quote.
Yeah.
And it's so true that we all need to be courageous enough to step into our power.
Seriously. And you know, when I think about the planet and the situation that we're all facing, is like the planet will be fine. You know, it might take a few million years and life will go on in some form. Maybe it turns out to be an intelligent, conscious cockroach planet. Whether we make it, right? That's the question. We're just now beginning to witness whatever it is that we have unleashed on our environment, and of which COVID is a symptom. So that's why I know that you and I share that sense of urgency, that it's all hands on deck. So
yeah, and it has to be many people, not one or two.
Yeah, you know, that's my hope. The 100th monkey effect, that enough of us wake up and get conscious and step into our authentic power, that it ripples out.
Yeah. So Christian, tell us your story of you talk about your childhood as you being an unlikely candidate to be talking about power. I find that very inspirational because we all had, our shy younger selves. So just tell us your story and we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's true. That's why I tell the story, because I am basically introverted. So my initial desire was to leave as much of myself out of the story as possible. But then I realized, that is important, because if I can figure out a way, as I have, to step into my power and to reconcile my ambivalent relationship to power, which we all have to some degree or another, then anybody can do it. And so I started out like painfully shy. I was okay one-on-one, but if you introduced a third human, like, I shut down. And in retrospect, because I wasn't even aware of it then consciously, but I had all A's in high school except for one B. And in retrospect, I think that I subconsciously did that on purpose to sabotage my getting valedictorian, because I just wasn't anywhere near ready to be able to speak in front of a group of, hundreds of people. And I find that kind of sad too. And, these days, like, I speak in front of thousands, and I've spoken all over the world. So that I know for a fact, like, if I can reconcile that, if I can transcend all those fears and limitations, because on top of that, I was incredibly conflicted. my whole adolescence, when I think about it, was one long depression with suicidal fantasies here and there. And these days, like, no matter what happens in my life, no matter the circumstances, so, relationship works out or it doesn't, a project succeeds or it fails, I never question my self-worth. And I think that's important for people to get too, that it's possible to heal that stuff and to get free.
Yeah. Well, like you write about, being vulnerable is part of stepping into your power. And you also came from a family that grew up in Cuba. And so you saw the, power coming from a place of ego and top down. And did that have part of the the formulative thought process that came
Yeah,
into?
sure. And I think that's also part of the irony of me writing about soulful power, about authentic power, about spiritual powers, because my first 10 years of life was in a communist regime, completely dictatorial and authoritarian. And like, as you say, power down, completely hierarchical power. And then my family was really Catholic, another very hierarchical and patriarchal top-down institution where 50% of humanity is pretty much disenfranchised in terms of leadership roles. And thankfully, I think what counterbalanced that for me was that in some ways I was raised in a matriarchal context, as my father was a psychiatrist, so he was working most of the time, especially when we immigrated to the US. And with 9 kids, they had to like hit the ground running, and my father hardly spoke English. So my mom pretty much ruled the roost at home. And so we have an older sister that I also write about, because she was a natural born leader. Like, as we were growing up, she's about maybe 2 years older than I am, and she just has those natural leadership qualities. Like, she used to boss around not only the 9 kids but the entire neighborhood of 20 other kids, and not in a mean way. Like, she would just say, hey, let's do that, and we would just naturally say, sure, let's go do that. And yet, here's the tragic part of it: when she hit puberty, like, something shifted, and I don't know if somebody said something to her specifically or directly, or whether she just got it through osmosis, that women in power just doesn't seem to add up, at least in that misunderstanding of power and women, and gender relations, that she just like kind of stuffed all that natural leadership. And I find that tragic.
Yeah. It often gets shut down, at an early age. I love too how you talk about how we live in a time of apocalypse, and apocalypse actually means lifting the veil.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I was so excited when I discovered that, researching the actual meaning of the word, because we are living in apocalyptic times. We've got missiles and fire raining down from the sky, and global plagues, and environmental disasters, and the oceans are rising, and so in many ways it's like a scary time, a time of transition. And yet, what the original meaning of the word in ancient Greek was lifting the veil, as you say. So when we frame it in that perspective, it's a more positive way to look at our time. So think about all the ways in which the veils are being lifted, and we're seeing the illusion, the cowardly man and the weak man standing behind the curtain. And so, for example, the corporate scandals, the church scandals, all these things that have been previously suppressed and hidden are no longer so. So we're getting to see the belly of the beast in a way, and that's both scary, that because of the transition times in which we find ourselves, but it's a good thing. And I think that ultimately what we're witnessing is like these systems that are just no longer sustainable, power systems, systems that have been ruling the world are just no longer sustainable. And in some ways, we could say that what we're witnessing is the end of the patriarchy. And we don't want to go back to, to like an imbalance of power, because that hasn't worked. So what we want to do is find balance this time between men and women, and between the masculine and the feminine energies inside each one of us.
Yeah, such an interesting time, and so much is being revealed for those with eyes and the heart to see. Incredible.
Yeah.
So tell us, let's move into what is authentic power. What stops us from moving into it? There's, in your book, you go through a number of different things, and I love how you call it the empire of the ego. And then there's so many layers underneath it.
Yeah. So the first reason that we have an ambivalent relationship with power is because we have been conditioned to be afraid of it. Ever since we were young, we've heard things like power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then all these underlying, especially for women, there are additional layers of that. Beliefs that, like, and my sister being an example of that, whether consciously or unconsciously, that women just don't get to play those roles of traditional power. And maybe the underlying fear beneath that is that if I really be all of who I am, if I really stepped into all my power, then I wouldn't find a mate, I wouldn't find a man, or I wouldn't find a boyfriend. And then add to that, in addition to the misunderstandings about power, and by the way, what they forgot to tell us or didn't tell us is that that initial quote, that initial perception of power corrupts, was taken out of context. Lord Acton was speaking specifically about political power, not the interpersonal, the human power that you and I are talking about. Add to the mix the fact that we've all been conditioned to suppress the emotions and to be afraid of the emotions. And we have labeled the emotions weakness, when the emotions are neither weak nor strong. They're just energy, like everything else. What used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics that it's so. Everything is energy, including the body, including the emotions. And so because we are afraid of confrontation, we fear conflict, we stuff ourselves, right? We stuff our desires, our dreams, our perceptions, our preferences, in order to avoid conflict, or for pseudo acceptance, or for morsels of pseudo love. And how many times do we end up saying then yes, to appease somebody else, or to not rock the boat, when inside we really feel no, but inside it's really not okay with us. But for all those other reasons that we've already been talking about, we stuff ourselves, and we deny our power. We sell ourselves cheaply, for pseudo acceptance, like I was saying, and for illusion of acceptance and security.
Yeah, and we're all so afraid of being alone, or cast out
Yeah.
of the group. If we
Yeah.
don't act a certain way, we'll get excluded. So it's a huge fear.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And once you realize it, like, I think in your book, you also talk about through breath work, often people realize that they are one with everything, and then that fear will dissipate.
Yes, and that's, that's when people ask me, well, how do I do that? How do I reclaim my power? I think there's for the first two steps toward that. First of all, understanding the difference between, what I call worldly power and spiritual power or soulful power, because the one that we're conflicted about is worldly power. And no wonder that we're conflicted about it, because every single day, all we have to do is watch the news, or even just glance through the headlines. We're witnessing constantly abuses of power. And what good-hearted person wants to be that way? So we again just forfeit it. We give it away. But there's a different kind of power, which is what we're talking about. And then the other step is like doing whatever we need to do to strengthen our sense of self, because the stronger our awareness of who we are, the stronger that our self-acceptance, our self-love, the less dependent then that we are on external validation. And so then it's a form of mastery, right? That we're getting to a place of such freedom internally that we just get to be who we are without the need for anybody's acceptance or validation, even if it means, even though that's just a fear, like a subconscious fear, as you're speaking about, of ending up alone. So as we step into our power and we deepen our sense of who we are no longer willing to sell out, even if it means that we would end up alone, which we don't have to unless we choose that. Because
Yeah.
as we get to that place of freedom, we also get to the place where, you know what, if it meant that, then I'm okay too.
Yeah.
I don't need anybody else we don't get to a place where we don't need anyone else to feel whole or to feel complete or to feel happy. We are that. And then if we find somebody that we can hold hands with and share this amazing experience of embodiment of, on this incredibly beautiful, magnificent planet, then great. That's added value, added bonus.
Exactly. And yeah, once you realize that it holds no power over you, you're so much freer. Some of the things you looked at are,
Yeah.
the river of lack, the river of rejection, the pitfall of victimhood, judgment by fear, and all these, like we've all experienced that. Can you talk a bit more about them? Because it would help people let go of them in a way.
Yes. So what you're referencing there is what I call, the traps on the journey to empowerment. Like, so these are the sand traps where we get caught. And so the first thing to realize as we started to talk about is that the difference between worldly power and soulful power. So just a couple of things about that. One is based on externals, right? So we tend to attribute power or think of people who are powerful to those who have money, who have fame, who are part of some hierarchical structure, whether it's corporate or educational or religious. But the thing about all those qualities that they're external. So by definition, they're outside of us and they're fickle. They could be here today, gone tomorrow. Whereas the other kind of power, soulful power, is inside each one of us. It's within, and nobody can give it to us. Nobody can take it away. Right? We are the only ones who can forfeit it, but nobody can take away our power unless we allow that. The worldly power tends to be very arrogant and self-serving, and it has an agenda, always trying to get something for itself. The other one is very humble. And I think, for example, of Gandhi or Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, in their simple robes and their sandal feet, their monastic demeanor, and you would never know how much power they hold until it's needed. And then watch out. Gandhi brought as you know, the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point without ever shooting a gun or landing a punch. Like, talk about power. And so then on the journey to reclaiming our power and connecting with our own expression of it, so that it is congruent with who we are, it is a match for who we are. Like, we all get to decide that, how we express our power. Then we go through these power traps, these things where we can get caught. So fear, like the one we were talking about earlier, fear of rejection, or beliefs of lack or insufficiency, self-esteem issues. These are all things that drag us down. And if we don't have a strong sense of who we are, then we're much more liable to give away our power. I forget the other ones that you mentioned.
The victim is huge, right?
Victim.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. That's the biggest one. And sometimes, I didn't even mention that right away because that's huge. And but we're here, so let's go into it. There are teachings that say that at a soul level we choose everything. So that means we choose the parents that we're born into, the country, the socioeconomic status, that we even choose like illness or rape or stuff like that. Like, I don't know about that. You know, I don't know if that's the way the system is set up. I can go there theoretically and I can say, yeah, well, I could see why we give ourselves challenges so that we have to like buck up against it and transcend, you know, overcome these obstacles and discover who we are in the process. But I don't know. I don't know that that's the way the system is. But this I know for sure, like without any question, that no matter what happens, no matter what happened, and one thing that we can count on is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way. Like that's one of the few things that we can count on. And so the thing is, like, no matter what curveballs life throws our way, we can always choose how we're going to be in response to that. Always. And from that perspective, there's no more victim, right? Because we no longer then feel victimized by life, right? So like, here's a challenge. I wasn't expecting that. Like, crap, I didn't want to have to deal with that, but how will I show up in response to that? Right? It's a very empowering way to be, rather than feeling completely victimized by life. And there's a great word, it's called pronoia, which is like the opposite of paranoia. And paranoia is kind of like this me against the world mentality, like poor me, you know, because that's the victim. Poor me. If it only had, if I hadn't been born in the situation that I was, if my mother, you know, hadn't done that, if my father hadn't left, if the teacher, the minister, society, sexism, homophobia, racism, if it only wasn't for that, then I would be fine. Then I would be happy. But as long as we're holding things that way, whether it's a person or a system responsible for our state of being, we just gave away our power, right? We will never have a sense of our power because we're blaming others, holding others responsible. And this is where it gets a little iffy, right? Because it's not minimizing anybody's pain. It's not saying, is not denying that really tragic stuff has happened to many of us. But it is saying that no matter what happened, we get to choose how we're going to be in response. And that's a very empowering way to be. And in fact, is nothing less than heroic. That's why this book is the first of a series about what it means to live heroically. It's not easy.
No, and it's part of planet Earth, isn't it? These things happen to, it's human. It's,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think if we realize that it can be our block to becoming who we truly came to be, and recognizing that, then you can move beyond it. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. 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 And
Beautiful.
inspires me the most in that area is Viktor Frankl, you know, the Austrian psychiatrist who spent years in concentration camps. He lost everybody. I mean, not only all his property, his title, his business, but everyone in his family, including his pregnant wife, right? Everybody taken away. And so, being a psychiatrist, he would be in this most inhuman of settings and try to figure out why some people seemed to survive and others didn't. And he started noticing that it had nothing to do with intelligence or education or beauty or physical strength or socioeconomic status. None of that stuff seemed to matter in there. What seemed to make a difference, the people who seemed to survive, were the ones who had a sense of purpose, a sense of something greater, a sense of meaning. And so he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And I feel really blessed that I was able to hear him speak when I was in high school in an advanced placement psychology class before he passed. And that guy was able to say, I mean, that they took everything away from him. And in that most inhuman of settings, he was able to say that they could take everything away from him except for one thing: the ability to choose how he would be in response to that. And so certainly, I mean, no matter, and again, without minimizing anybody's trauma, but if he can do it there, we can certainly do it in our lives, no matter what happened. How will I be in response to that? That's all we're suggesting, right? It's like reintroducing that element of choice rather than allowing circumstances of life to disempower us and take away our choice. And then we walk around feeling like, giving our power away the rest of our lives. And it's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And you describe at one point in the book that, service to others is one of the ways out. And I have noticed in my deepest times of grief, if I ask, how can I help? I'm here to help. My heart will just expand, and it's like, you're on the right track.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you describe your podcast, that you talk about spiraling up in order to spiral out. And so I love that connection that you just made. That when we get ourselves out of our own little ego mind and feeling sorry for ourselves and poor me and woe is me, through service, through making a difference, through reaching our hand out to somebody else, like it pops us out. Like we spiral out of that place of disempowerment.
Yeah, it's an incredible force, actually.
Yeah.
I love too how you talk about the monkey mind and Gollum in your book as being one of the things that goes on in our mind and stops us from popping out, right?
Yes, yes. And as you can tell, I love all my um, hero movies and superhero movies. So I use a lot of examples from that in the book. Um, and the monkey mind is the ego mind, which is really critical that we all understand how it works, because and there's so much to say about it. Like I teach weekend retreats and we spend a morning talking about the ego mind, and because it's really important that we understand how it works. But for our time, our limited time together, here's a great metaphor. If you put a baseball um, in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego mind is. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, 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 tiny part of who we are to think that it is all who we are. And we end up making significant, important, critical life choices from its very small and tiny and always fear-based perspective. So the ego mind is like the sense of self, right? It's like our sense of individual identity. And it's both a leap in consciousness, because humanity hasn't always had a sense of self, according to experts. At some point we were like the rest of the animal kingdom, the rest of creation, just feeling at one with. So having a sense of individual personality is both a huge leap in consciousness and in terms of conscious evolution, and it's also the source of all our suffering. Because once we have a sense of individual personality, now we could have abandonment issues. Now we can feel alone. Like now we have a sense of our own mortality. We can feel separate. We can feel rejected. Um, so there's a price to pay for that individual identity. Um, the ego mind is also what you're referring to, is the monkey mind. And that's a Buddhist concept, because it's that part of us is that inner monologue that from the moment we get up in the morning, before our feet have even hit the floor, it's already going, right? Till the moment where we fall asleep exhausted at the end of the day, if we're able to fall asleep, because sometimes it keeps us going through the night, because it has something to say about everyone and everything every single moment of the day, and it drives us crazy. So it jumps from thought to thought in the same way that a monkey goes from branch to branch, and that's where they get the monkey mind thing. um, and so there's so much more to say about the ego and why it gets us into trouble, because it takes it, for example, takes everything personally. It's very reactive. So it takes what other people do or say personally, and then reacts and tries to get them back. And so it's not a very effective strategy if we want to have relationships that work. And so on the journey to freedom and on the journey to personal empowerment, to authentic empowerment, it's really important that we understand how the ego mind works. And in the book, I walk people by the hand. Like the first part of the book, the first quarter of the book is all about that, with small, short chapters illustrations like the map that you were talking about to help us understand how it works so that we can get free from it, right? So that we can reclaim our power from this tiny, tiny part of who we are. It's if we want to have relationships that work, if we want to have a sense of personal power, if we want to have a life that's filled with meaning and with purpose, critical to understand how the ego mind works.
Right? Because we can have all these great ideas. We all have them. But sooner or later, and often within minutes, the ego mind gets in control and tells you all the reasons that you can't do it. You know,
Exactly.
you're not ready. Somebody's going to judge you if it's not perfect, like all these things.
Perfectionism, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all from the ego. All those things you mentioned is just ego function.
Yeah.
And not a very effective way to live. All the voices of self-doubt, or even self-hatred, that's all the ego.
Yeah. Like it's so valuable to see that. Even, and we're all going to fall back into it, but to just tell yourself to stop and move forward. So, what are the ways to move forward to get some clarity on where to go?
Yeah, well, for sure, understand the ego mind. Like pick up this book or any other book that's going to help you understand how it works, and how it's a self-made prison of fear and limitation, so that we can let ourselves free. Nobody can do that for us. Only we can let ourselves free. Um, so toward that end, there's going within is unavoidable, and we live in a world in which we're encouraged to do the opposite, right? To be distracted with television or shopping, or all the little computers that we walk around with attached to all the time. um, so many distractions, food, sex, drugs, right? But if we want to reclaim our power, there's no way around it. We've got to go within, right? We've got to get to know ourselves. And I would even say, if we want to have real relationships that have a chance at working, there's no way around that, right? So we've got to learn how to go within, because that's the only way that we're going to really love each other, love ourselves. We can't really love somebody else until we really love ourselves. And it's almost a cliche to say that. Um, so so that's step one, right? It's like going within, then understand the ego mind. Um, Again, there's no way around that if you want to be free. And like you're saying, it's like it's part of how we're hardwired. But as we understand, and it's very tricky, it's very insidious. And what I've noticed too is people on a spiritual path, the further that we go along the spiritual path, the ego gets trickier, and it even begins to use spiritual teachings as weapons to prove that it's right. Um, and so it actually gets more refined. But as if we continue on the path, we eventually move beyond that phase too, and we get to the place of real authentic freedom and self-expression, where we just get to be who we are wherever we are, and no longer willing to sell ourselves short, to sell out on our power, to sell out on our biggest dreams. um, and it all stems from, so I would say those three things, like those three steps: going within, getting to know yourself and do whatever healing you've got to do in terms of your past traumas, your trust issues, all the stuff that we all gather along the way through life experiences. Um, Understand the ego mind, and then understand the difference between powers, so that you don't, between worldly power and soulful power, so that we no longer give it away.
Yes. And so to recognize those things that you're talking about are so important, and then to go inside to find out who we are and what our expression should be in this world. So you talk about breath work
Yes,
and
Jen.
meditation. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. That's it. And no, again, like nobody can tell us what we're here for. We can get some insights and some feedback, from external sources. People like, "Oh, you're so good at that." You might consider doing this or that, but ultimately our sense of purpose, um, that only comes from within. And how critical it is, going back to the Viktor Frankl story, how critical it is that we connect with what we're really doing here. With that sense of meaning, sense of purpose, it's actually a matter of survival. Um, Even if we're not at a concentration camp, it's about quality of life. Um, yes, and I lost my train of thought. I got
About going. Yeah, but that, as you were speaking, it reminds me of the time when I chose to become a naturopathic doctor. I was in business and everything was, ego mind was huge. It was all about fashion. And of course, money started to dwindle and I realized I wasn't doing my life purpose. So I meditated, I prayed, and I asked to be shown within myself what I should be doing. And a few days later, I was walking my dog and this voice came into my head. And I'm sure it was, my own higher self or my own guidance and it just said, you should be a doctor. And that had never occurred to me ever. Like, I know that, what it was about, but it's just such a powerful thing to go inside and then you need to be silent to listen.
I got chills you saying that, and so I remember your question now, which was about breathwork and meditation,
Yes.
and that's the benefit of meditation, right? Most of the time when we sit in meditation, it's going to be boring, and we're going to catch ourselves, going through our to-do list, or oh, I've got to do that when I get back into the office, or just wait till I run into her. This is what I should have said to her. This is what I'm going to tell her when I see her again. And then, oh, there we go. We bring ourselves. Then we notice that we've been in the monkey mind, and we bring ourselves back to the breath, or we bring ourselves back to the monkey mind, or back to the mantra, um, and then we go off again. And so, but the benefit of being willing to do that, even if we do it 3 times a week, for 10 minutes, even if it's boring, and even if we're just struggling with the monkey mind, little by little it gets better, and we spend less and less time stuck in the monkey mind. And it's that awareness of just that practice of noticing, oh, there I go doing my to-do list, oh, there I go futurizing, oh, there I go rehashing the past. That's practice. Like we're practicing for the concert, or for the championship game. That's where we're gathering the skills and the self-awareness and the presence, so that when it does count, and we're about to head into a bad argument with somebody that we love, and then we're going to react and then regret what we said or did, it's that moment. That's where the benefit of the practice comes in. It's like, oh, there I go. I'm about to go over the waterfall, and I'm about to say something that I might regret. Let me take a breath, pause. Let me go sit by the tree, or go around the lake, or sit by the ocean, calm myself down. And how do I want to be, right? How do I want to respond from a place of realness and authenticity, not just reacting because I was hurt, or because they said something that was mean, right? So just because they did doesn't mean that we have to um, do something in return, because then it becomes just a battle of the egos. You say this, I say that, you say this, and we know how that ends up, right? Everybody's hurt, nobody's happy, relationships pay a price. Um, so it's that moment of grace, if you would, of just having the presence. It's like, that one hurt, ouch. How do I want to be? How do I choose to be in response?
Mm. And you talk about going into the heart as well.
Yeah, and that's really good too, to have that awareness of ourselves as energy beings, and to understand the chakras, or the energy centers of the body. And the heart, to me, being the most important, because you think about, it's kind of the antidote to being stuck in the mind, in the ego mind. Like we can't be in the heart and in the ego mind at the same time. um, and the thing about the chakras, or the heart chakras specifically, but I think they all work this way. They're like like the shutter of a camera or the iris of the eye, they open and close to allow more or less light, and in the case of the heart, more or less love in. And the thing about that is, like, we can't close the heart selectively. So if I shut my heart to, my dad who did this, or my mom who didn't do that, or the teacher, or the minister, or society, or to the ex who cheated me, or the boss who cheated on me, or the boss who fired me, I can't shut my heart selectively, right? If I shut it to one of them, I shut it, period. And so, talk about giving our power away again. And in this case, to the perpetrator, something that wasn't good in our lives. So I, for one, I'm not willing to give the power over my heart to anybody, right? So this is not even about them. This is between each one of us on our heart. This is between each one of us and love, between our heart and life. And that sometimes the only way through that, and because of course we don't want to walk around with an open heart, like, stupidly. If somebody has cheated on us or betrayed us, and more than once, particularly, like, we might need to make a difficult choice about that. So it's not about being stupid, or giving our power away, but it is, we have to find a way to forgive. It doesn't mean we have to hang out with them. Doesn't mean we have to be best friends. It doesn't mean we ever have to see them again. But we've got to figure out a way to forgive.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were saying that, we all have those experiences where we've been really hurt, and you can feel your heart close. And you're right
Yes.
that the only way to keep it open is it can't be conditional. Like, you have to
Yeah.
find, yeah, it's beautiful what you're saying.
Yeah. And it's not easy, right? It's heroic. Because sometimes, and Jen, you've hit on all the most difficult things, like the victim consciousness and forgiveness. Those are the two most difficult parts of all this conversation, because sometimes we have to forgive if we want to be free. We've got to forgive what feels unforgivable, and some of the things that humans do to each other is like, man, it's like tough to forgive. And so, how do we do that? How do we forgive the unforgivable? And so here's a way that I learned from a former teacher that I studied with, and she had a beautiful way to think about it. Where if you think of the word forgive, 2 syllables, flip them around, give for. So what we're doing when we forgive somebody else or ourselves, which is even more difficult sometimes, is we're giving the other person the room to be human, to make mistakes, to make a royal mess of things, to fall short of the mark, to f things up royally. Um, and the ego, I like to say, went to law school. So the ego appoints itself judge, jury, and prosecutor, and it knows exactly what the other person did that was wrong, and what the punishment should be, and delivers the punishment sometimes. Um, so what we're going for in forgiveness is just getting off that self-righteous stance. It's like, I know what they did was wrong, and I would never be that way. I would never do something like that. Right? It's a very self-righteous, very separate way of being. Um, and by the way, this is not about excusing anything or excusing any behavior, or having to be in relationship with anybody that doesn't serve us. So to be clear about that. Um, so forgiveness could be as simple as walking in their shoes, right? So putting in the question mark and saying something like, perhaps, I don't see it, but perhaps, maybe, had I been raised by their parents in their situation, had I been raised, who knows what was going on in their brain biochemistry, who knows if there was any substance abuse, who knows, maybe, possibly, I might have been the same way. Maybe. I don't see it, but maybe. And just even putting that maybe, that question mark, gets us off that self-righteous, separate stance of the ego, which is so strong. And it opens the way, right? It's like the cracking open the heart again, and it makes the way possible for forgiveness to take place.
Yeah. Beautiful, because we've all had these really tough times and, things that have happened to us, but you can, with it's empathy, isn't it? Putting yourself in someone else's shoes and being able to feel what they've been through and realizing that they're caught in their own stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And,
So,
and yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, fair enough. It happens.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes it's really, really tough. Sometimes it feels impossibly tough and difficult to forgive. But the thing is, it's like if we want to be free, we have to. If we're holding somebody over the fire for what they did or failed to do, our hand is also getting burnt. And we've also been told this, it's almost cliche to say that forgiveness is for us. And because as long as we're holding on to what they did or didn't do, we're not free. We're in prison and we're giving our power away. And again, none of this is easy. In fact, it's heroic work, but it is so worth it. It is so worth it because I mean, I can't imagine another way to live because it's freedom and it's reclaiming our power and winding down to the beginning of the conversation is like, I know if I can do it, I have no doubt that anybody else can.
Yeah.
It's a choice and it's work, but it's doable. And then what happens is once we get on this road on the hero's journey, we spend less time, right? We get hijacked by the ego and its machinations and shenanigans less frequently and less frequently and less frequently. And when we do, when it grabs us and then we react and get all defensive and regret it, then we spend less time stuck in that.
Yeah. And you see it as abnormal instead of normal, right? You see yourself go there. And so you can recover from it. And what you were saying reminds me of the first quote too. It's a time when we all have to become aware of this and move into a different realm, a different place on this planet where we come from a different place for power.
Yeah, absolutely. And because here's the price we pay if we don't. On a personal level, if we don't figure out a way to step into our power in a way that is congruent and that is a match, what we're risking is a life of soul devouring mediocrity, um, and frustration, right? Because we will continue stuffing ourselves and saying yes when inside we feel no. And on a global level, what we're risking is just blowing each other up in the name of God, tragically.
Yeah. And because of wanting to be right.
Yes, exactly.
Like
Exactly.
that's what war is.
That's what war is. And it's what I call, the theological pissing contest. My God is bigger than yours. Um, and mine is the only one true path. If we continue on that path, we're just going to blow each other up.
Yeah. What is the Latin meaning of religion?
Religion comes from the word, the Latin root religare, which means to rebind, to bind or rebind. Presumably rebinding to the sacred, but even looking at it from that perspective, to me, it feels restrictive. And by the way, I honor all traditions. I don't belong. I was raised really Catholic, as I said, but I don't these days. I honor them all, and I challenge them all,
Mm-hmm.
to really fulfill their purpose, which is to guide people back to God or the universe or the sacred, however you think of that. Um, and so to the degree that a religion is doing that and is guiding us to our better angels and to our highest potential and to find our own authentic connection with the sacred, then great,
Mm-hmm.
right? Find one that works for you and that feeds you and that fuels you on this path. And to the degree that they're fomenting hate and exclusivity and I've got the one and only true way and everybody else goes to hell, and demonizing them, right? Sometimes religions demonize each other. Um, then, I'm sorry, but they're not fulfilling their job. Um, and so In contrast, if we look at the origin of the word spirituality, which is also from Latin, spirare, from that same root, spirare, we get both respiration and inspiration. So it goes back to our conversation with the conversation we started to get into about breath and the breath work. Because in many, and I would say most religions and spiritual traditions, the same word, one word can mean spirit or breath, depending on the context. And so for me, that's a much more soulful, relationship to the divine, which is like it's inside of us, right? It's our own breath breathing us life. The breath is our most faithful and loyal companion on this journey of embodiment. So what a different way to, it works better for me. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, that's why you teach breath work.
Yeah, why I treat the why, and because it's also been incredibly healing for me. It's like, as I think I said earlier, my dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. When I discovered breath work 30 years ago, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and it heals so profoundly at so many levels. Not only, I don't know anything more effective in terms of healing past trauma. And it heals mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. And I know that sounds too good to be true. I know. To the more logical, scientific part of me, it doesn't make any sense that just from breathing, all that can happen. In addition to resulting in some of the most amazing, ecstatic, blissful experiences that I had only read about before I was able to access them through breath work. And it's accessible to anybody. I've been doing it now for 30 years and offering it all over the world, and high level people, millionaires and billionaires and leaders of multinational corporations that have facilitated it for. It works. And I can't argue with results. The science isn't there yet in terms of explaining how it works. Like what's happening in the brain in terms of releasing past trauma and even physical healing. The only way that I can understand it is going back to that spirit breath connection.
Yes. And back to the whole purpose of our conversation, it is the conduit to knowing what our purpose is. It's our inspiration.
Inspiration, that's the other word, right? Also from the same root, spirare, yeah. Inspiration. And I love your story about your inspiration and how it came from within. And that it was actually an audible voice. I've only had that happen 3 times in my life where I actually heard an audible voice in meditation, or I think all 3 times was in meditation. So I love that story, and out of that one experience, and thank you for following it, right? You had a choice. You didn't have to.
Oh, I had a million excuses why I couldn't. I mean, a million. But like you say in the book, jump in, right? Like you got to get started, get rolling, and then be aware of the ego mind stopping you along the way. Many times it's going to try.
Yes.
So yeah, just talk to us a bit about that. How to, there's all these hurdles that are going to come, even if you do get started.
Oh my God, it's what I call the self-inflicted mind F. The number that we do ourselves, and the voice of self-doubt, the things that is that harsh inner judge, that's the ego. The things that we tell ourselves we would never say to anybody else. We are so mean and so cruel to ourselves, and that's all ego. That's all ego. So that's part of the process of freedom too, is when we hear that inner, when we notice that we're doing that to ourselves, like cut it out. Like, it begins by disidentification with that voice. It's like, rather than taking it so personally, we just like, hey, wait a minute, that's my ego. That's my ego talking. So we begin to separate from that part of us. And so identifying with a baseball and re-identifying with the stadium, which is our authentic self. That is the higher self, the soul, whatever you want to call it. the soulful self. And so it's shifting our perspective and no longer being willing to give our power away to the tiny, 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 tiny baseball. And like we've both been saying, is it all begins by going within. And so yeah, there's going to be many obstacles along the way. It's the hero's journey. So it's going to be nothing short of heroic, and it gets easier and it becomes second nature eventually. And part of the hero's journey is that the hero leaves the safety of the village, or the group or the family structure, and goes out into the world. And it's ultimately a journey of self-discovery, but faced with incredible challenges, um, and sometimes death and dismemberment, but like the metaphoric death, and that metaphoric death is really the death of the ego structure. So that's part of the disidentification process with the baseball. And so then once we go through that experience, then the hero returns to the village or the family structure with all the wisdom to share. It's like, so going back to your story, if you hadn't heeded the voice, right? If you had allowed your own fear, your own doubt, all the reasons, like, how am I going to support myself? How am I going to pay the bills? Who do I think I am being a healer? What do I know? All those,
Oh, yeah.
that stuff that we tell ourselves. If you had given your power away to that, like, how many people would not have benefit from your saying yes? Not only the people that you have brought healing to through your practice, but now doing this kind of work where who knows who's listening to this, and who knows who's heard one of your interviews and their lives were changed from that interview. And it all came from that moment of choice of you saying yes. Okay, I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I don't know how it's gonna work, but I say yes. I'll do it.
Yeah. And then just continuing to do it, even if there are the hurdles. This planet, it is only for heroes.
I think so.
It's quite the school.
I think so. It's not for the faint of heart.
No. Thank you, Kristen. Where would people be able to find your book and I know you have some meditation courses online and this kind of thing. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, well, the book is available on Amazon and all the online places, and brick and mortar places where you can buy books. So it's called Awakening the Soul of Power. My website is Soulful Power, and there's a particular link, and I forget how it goes, but I think you're going to provide it to them, that if they go through that landing page, they will receive a guided meditation on trust, which is what we're talking about, right? Like, where do we place our trust as we go on this difficult journey? And they'll get other things, like they'll get power practices from the book. I think they get a chapter from the book that talks about what living heroically means in the 21st century. So it's soulfulpower.com, and I think it's /free guided meditation.
I'll be sure to include that. So let's end this with, what does trust mean? Where do we place our trust? Our last.
You go for the hard questions every time. I love that. Let me see. Where do we? So here's the, in the limited time that we have left. Here's the image from, what's the name of the movie? Indiana Jones. I think it's the Holy Grail. It's the one where he's standing at the side of a cliff, and there's this endless chasm, and then on the other side is where the Holy Grails are. And he's looking at his maps, and it's like, how do I get across? There's just no way across. And it's not until he realizes that he has to step into the void, right? That's trust, right? So we step into the void, and then the universe, like he steps into the void, and the stone shows up to meet his foot. And that's what trust is. Like,
Yeah.
that's That's what you did, right? When you heard the voice and you said, well, I have no idea how this is going to work out, and I'm going to say yes. And you wrote to the School of Homeopathy or whatever your first step was. And then the universe responds. And that's how miracles happen, right? The miracles don't happen in a vacuum. Like, we have to take that first step into the void. Then the universe can say, oh, okay, this one's serious, and responds.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for who you are and what you do, and the many ways that you serve us all.
Thank you, Christian. I honor everything you're bringing forward to this world. And to everyone out there, don't forget, don't give away your power to anyone else. Be the creation of your own life. Just spiral up, spiral out.